Western Pennsylvania. Warm welcome for Keith Ferrazzi. He's an American entrepreneur, recognized global thought leader in relational and collaborative sciences. He's chairman of Ferrazzi Greenlight and the Research Institute. He works to identify behaviors that block global organizations from reaching their goals and to transform them by coaching new behaviors that increase growth and shareholder value. He's introduced a new transformational operating system he calls co-elevation. That leads to exponential growth and value. Formerly, he was CMO of Deloitte and Starwood Hotels. Keith's a #1 New York Times best-selling author of the books Who's Got Your Back, Never Eat Alone, his just-released book, Leading Without Authority, as well as a frequent contributor to Harvard Business Review, Wall Street Journal, Fast Company, Forbes, Inc., Fortune, and other publications. Keith's 20-year history of transforming C-suite executive teams has made him an agent of transformation and among the world's greatest and most sought-after coaches. I just learned this morning that he's working on a new book, Competing in the New Work World. And so I'm excited to introduce Keith Ferrazzi to lead us in this session. Keith?
Rick, thanks so much. And I also want to introduce my business partner, John. John, I guess we're all going to be on screen here together, which is great. And so I would just ask for the three of you to be a proxy for this wonderful audience out there. And it would be super if you could interrupt me, rough me up, ask me questions, call bullshit. I don't care what you do. Just feel free to have a very robust dialogue here on behalf of those who are watching. What happened last year was a terrible place of disruption for many of us. But at the same time, it was also an extraordinary opportunity. And what I would like to do is bring to this wonderful audience assembled here a real discussion. And the question is that I put on you is, have you really utilized the opportunity? Have you seized an opportunity of a great inflection point, perhaps in your personal lives as well as in your professional lives and your business success? And have you gotten to a stage where as things begin to open up, and I'm hoping they continue to open up and don't regress, which is always a possibility at this stage, seeing what's going on in India today. Is it possible that you still have an opportunity to what I call leap forward 5 years? I don't want you crawling out of the rubble. I want you springing forward. I don't want you going back to work. I want you going forward to work. Today's conversation is going to be about that. So last year we raised about $2 million on a research project in conjunction with Harvard Business School, Dell Computer, Weight Watchers, Lee Hecht Harrison, Salesforce, SAP, Anaplan. I mean, there's a ton of folks. We all got together, Ferrazzi Greenlight, my firm. We all got together, put some cash up and said, let's bring together a community of business executives who want to be change agents, who want to really define this as an inflection point to go forward. And what we did was we identified a model, a business model for transformation. And the way we did it was this. We looked around at what companies like you and others were doing. We also partnered with Forbes and Inc. and Harvard Business Review and Fast Company. And we were hosting forums, not as speaking forums like this, but instead they were research forums. Intention was to extract wisdom, extract insight, extract best practices. And what I found was this. What I found was that executives all over the world were innovating in different categories. And in each place they were innovating, they were extraordinarily successful, but they weren't innovating everywhere. So I thought if I could pull together my clients tend to be executive teams struggling through and wanting to achieve some form of transformation. If I could pull together my clients and say, well, this client is doing an incredible job of setting up detection posts to really look around corners for risk avoidance and opportunity identification. And this client is doing an incredible job of adopting Agile on an enterprise basis. And this client is adopting a much more collaborative thinking, a much more innovative way of thinking when they're using remote tools. And what if we put all that together into a single methodology of leadership for a crisis in a post-pandemic world? And because here's what I believe. I believe that even if we get out of this crisis, we're still in a mess of volatility. No matter where we go going forward, we're going to be in a mess of volatility. So the question is, how do you lead in a radically volatile, disruptive future? And we just have to recognize that's the stasis. Now, it certainly was during this past crisis, but I think if we could learn not to, and I use an analogy here. I was thinking about it this weekend as I was writing the book, and the book, as Rick suggested, is called Competing in the New Work World, How Radical Adaptability, which is the methodology I'll be sharing with you, how radical adaptability separates the best from the rest. And I was thinking of this analogy. I'm not a great swimmer. I mean, someone could say, do you swim? I'd say no. They say, do you know how to swim? I'd say yes, right? So I can float. I can get by. If somebody threw me off a boat, like, several hundred yards offshore, for the sake of survival, I would probably get to shore. At least I would hope I would, but I think I can get to shore. Now, I would be much more exhausted than somebody who actually understands the techniques and the strokes. Okay. And so what I'd like to teach you is that while we all survived, and some even thrived during this pandemic, we did so and we were exhausted, and we didn't do it elegantly. We've learned a lot from this past year about the elegance of living and working in crisis. And not all of us have learned, but all of us collectively have created a methodology. So that's what I want to review with you today. And I'm going to share with you a slide, which I hope doesn't overtake you in terms of, can you see this?
Yep, we can see it.
Beautiful. I hope that this slide doesn't overtake your screen and prevent you from seeing the four of us at all. So hopefully you can move them apart and that sort of thing is how this works. But I want to first start and talk a little bit about the leadership redesign that occurred. And then I want to talk a bit about how to apply that leadership redesign with your teams to leap forward in your organizations around workforce redesign, around business model redesign, and really looking at purpose in your organization and how it acts as a foundation. I'm going to get very methodological with you. I'm an entrepreneur myself. I've got a small business, medium-sized business myself. And I want to talk to you about how you apply these principles today and tomorrow with your executive team. If you're a leader of an organization, my intention is to give you a bit of a walkthrough of how the best of your peers are applying each of these. So let's start, interestingly enough, in the middle. I want to start with inclusion. When the crash happened, my publisher and I had just launched a book. And the book was called Leading Without Authority. I'll show you a picture of it. Leading Without Authority. This book came out really at the peak of the pandemic, and it is a guide for you as a leader to step aside from being the hub and spoke of everything that goes on in your company, and asks your team members and everyone in your culture, in your organization, to step up and meet you as a leader, to lead vision, to lead other individuals, whether or not these individuals have a large reporting relationship with a lot of people or not. The bottom line is real transformation. What we saw during the peak of the pandemic was that people ignored boundaries. They ignored silos. They ignored the fact that they didn't have authority, and they just got stuff done. And it was wonderful. The sharp elbows of turf got a lot softer. The silos, the breakdowns, people were waking up and saying, what do we need to do? Who do we need to work with? How do we get it done? And they were getting it done. It was wonderful. And that's what happens in a crisis. But then we go back into silos where we prevent the kind of innovation that we really need. which would be really unleashing our whole team. Imagine if you could free up 30% of your time by your team stepping up to meet you, by being each other's coaches, by being each other's innovation lifters, by being each other's energy lifters. The word that I created, which was mentioned by Rick a little earlier, was co-elevation. Imagine if your team decided to commit collectively to the same mission, but also to commit to each other to get there. And that is, in fact, what inclusion is all about. In fact, what we started seeing in the last year were organizations that started doing something that I call teaming out. An entrepreneur like yourself, a leader like yourself, can very easily start asking themselves, who do I want in my meetings? And forget about your executive team. I started teaming out with other entrepreneurs who would pop into my meetings, who had expertise, who had done particularly interesting things in certain areas of marketing or growth development. And as a result of that, I was able to have a very abundant perspective on growth of my company this year. I've grown my business this year faster than ever before because of this principle of inclusion and teaming out. I've started to ask my organization to step up, to coach each other, to be leaders, not just single leaders. It used to be it was myself and one primary partner were leading this organization. And now I've got 6 individuals who are crucial to the co-creation of the future of my organization. And with that, that is a really different perspective as a leader, asking yourself, who am I inviting in? Who am I asking to step up? And that's happened in abundance. Now, soon after you get a group of individuals deeply committed to a mission in each other, I would then ask you to adopt a new operational protocol. Now, this operational protocol, and by the way, Rick, I can leave this up and just chat to it, or we can drop it down and I can go to a bigger screen. What would you suggest?
I would suggest you drop it down and go to a bigger screen.
There we go. Thank you. Okay, so the operational model that I think has won the course in 2020 is the operating model of agility. Now, many of you in your organizations have some parts of your company that practice Agile. Maybe there's a program manager who knows how to do Agile. Maybe you have your technology team doing some form of Agile, but very few executive teams, very few organizations were run on Agile. But in the peak of the pandemic, you didn't know it, but I call it crisis Agile. You would negotiate what you needed to do in the coming week, right? You would wake up at the end of that week and ask yourself, what did we get done? What's changed? How has our customer changed? How has the market changed? How has the environment changed? What new policies? What new rules? What new barriers? Oh my God, now there's fires and then there's this. So you at the end of the week, you asked yourself and you reassessed and you pivoted. And you then created another strategy and another plan for the coming week. That's the core of Agile. And in between those, you probably didn't have time to micromanage. You probably allowed people a lot of individual autonomy. Now, that is a superfood of an operating system that we need to hold on to. Your teams came together in small work teams, small agile spurts, and then assessed what was going on in the outside world in order to receive that information, digest it, and change plans. Boom, 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 pivot, 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 agile, agile, agile. And that was powerful. Do not lose that. When I'm coaching executive teams, my first question is, what are the 6 most important hills you have to achieve? And then with each of those hills, let's go on a set of agile sprints. Now, when I was working at the heights of prior to the pandemic, at the heights of the organization at Delta Airlines, we were looking at quarterly meetings, quarterly transformation meetings, where we were redefining the travel industry. Now, in a big organization like that, that was great. Once a quarter, we'd get together, we'd redefine the future, we'd see where we'd pivot, we'd try things out. It was fantastic. Now, all of a sudden, the pandemic hits, 90% reduction in revenue loss. We went to agile sprints of every day. In fact, twice a day. So agile, the velocity of your transformation meetings in an agile world have to do with the velocity or the acceleration of the change. So if you got 6 major hills that you're taking, most organizations need an every other week cadence if they're going through real transformation, or at least a monthly cadence. I'm going to highly suggest that you start adopting what we would call a transformation meeting. Let's just say once a month for now. And if you feel you need it once every other week, then go ahead and do that. And then the question is, you break down the agenda in that transformation meeting. Your question should be, where do we need alignment? Do we all have clarity on the 6 most important hills? Within each of those, where are the risks, right? Where are there opportunities for innovation and growth? And you fill your agenda with critical questions. Now, the one thing about being in a remote world is that, and I'm going to pause for a second on this. The one thing about being in a remote world is that you actually have abundant collaborative tools you didn't have available to you before. And many people are just wrong-headed when they are thinking like, we can't do innovation in a remote and virtual world. We've got to go back to a physical work environment to do it well. It's just wrong. What people are doing is they're looking at how you did remote poorly and utilized tools poorly. You are proud of yourself and patting you on the back because, oh my gosh, we got through this and we did well. No, you didn't do well because most of you did not utilize the effective tools for ultimate innovation. You mismanaged your teams and you mismanaged the tools. And I'm going to teach you some things in this call that I think can be significantly helpful. But what we found, and we're actually going to show you a spider graph of this, what we found was when you applied the true high return practices of working in a remote or a hybrid world, you could out innovate where you were before. Why? Because you can include more people. You can hear more voices, right? This idea of inclusion and teaming out. You can have more robust dialogue. Now, you don't think you can because what you did in the old work world is you used to sit around in a meeting of 10 people and then you had a Zoom meeting and you sat around in a meeting of 10 people. No, you don't do that. You had availability for breakout rooms. You had availability for sending everybody into small, asking a question like, what are the most important risks that we're missing? Where are the most important growth opportunities that we could capture? You ask that question, you snap your fingers, you go into a breakout room, right? And it's not even your executive team. You can have your whole damn company involved. Have everybody open a Google Doc. Have everybody meet for 15 minutes and hammer out ideas of risks, hammer out ideas of growth and innovation, right? You could put a critical question to your entire sales organization associated with, different strategies and different tactics. We did this at Merrill Lynch. And at Merrill Lynch, we asked, how do we generate better net new accounts, more net new accounts? We grew net new accounts by 50% by crowdsourcing from the sales organization. How? This was not what you did. What you did is you sat and you broadcasted like you used to do in town halls. But now we can be interactive. We can be co-creative. We can be transformational. We can be co-elevating as an organization. So you have these transformational meetings and you reboot your meetings for a new contract on how you're going to work together with the broadest number of individuals. And by the way, we can even use outside organizations. You can bring your vendors in. You can bring partners in. You can bring advisors in. You can bring anybody you want to in because it's a snap of a finger and they can be in there for 15 minutes, go into the breakout rooms, have their say, and leave. You can bring your customers in. So all of this is so important for this monthly transformational meeting where you're practicing agile sprints, you're opening up inclusion. Now, the next thing I want you to talk to you about is foresight and forecasting. It's very, very important for us to consider how we look around the corners. Remember at the end of those weeks where we quickly assessed what all the damages were, what the possibilities were, what the risks were, and then we got back to work and we repivoted, we reforecasted. We were forecasting on a weekly basis. We need to keep that going. Working right now with a company called Anaplan, which is a software firm for planning and development and forecasting and financial planning. And we're really studying this principle of crowdsourced forecasting, because it used to be that forecasting and planning was done on an annual basis, the CFO and the CEO, and then somebody would hand down the budgets and everybody would have to meet these budgets and they'd come back with budgets numbers that were over the estimate. Then there'd be a negotiation. Bullshit. Now we need to be planning constantly. We need to be forecasting constantly. Here's the recommendation. In that monthly transformation meeting, what you're going to do is you're going to have every individual in your team responsible for a different type, a different level of forecasting. Someone's got competitive forecasting. So what I mean by forecasting, what I mean is somebody's got how are we detecting the risks and opportunities that are showing up in competition, in our customer base and markets, in our in our political ecosystem that may be occurring in a particular area, macroeconomic policies, threats of health disruption, as we've seen, whatever they are. Every person takes a different thing, and they show up in the meeting. They show up in the meeting, and they're sitting there, and they've literally go around briefly and say, who's got a detected risk or opportunity to throw out to the team, so that we can decide if we're going to move from that into a separate assessment meeting. A separate assessment meeting is when the team gets together and just focuses on that topic, and with pre-planning, questions in advance, breakout rooms, discussions, and then we decide whether we go to the third piece after detect and assess is scenario planning. Now, that's an organization that would continue to have foresight, that would continue to have innovation. If you run that as a small play in your monthly transformation meetings, you won't end up off base. You won't end up being bitten in the back end. I saw way too many companies that had the information about the pandemic well before the close and the shutdown, but did not have a place to entertain whether or not that there was enough of a risk to foresee it. Well, on the other hand, Lockheed Martin did, and they had actually gone fully virtual in February. Fully virtual in February, were buying all the computer systems they needed. They didn't have any problems getting masks. They didn't have any problems getting the equipment that they needed to be remote and virtual. And they were well virtual before, at least the aerospace division. They were well virtual before the pandemic hit. Very few companies had that kind of ongoing forecasting and foresight information. Now, I want to add a last piece, which is resilience. Resilience. We were exhausted. Remember, we were all washed up on shore like I would if I were to have to swim 100 yards in the ocean. We were all washed up on shore, exhausted, lying there on the beach. And I started a research project I brought two new partners in. I brought Headspace, CC, the CEO there, and Weight Watchers, Mindy, the CEO there. And I said, let's do a research study on emotional and physical well-being and how to lift that. We wrote a series of pieces. You can find them in Fast Company and a number and Forbes on tools and tips on that. But one of the things that I ended up writing in an HBR piece on the subject of resilience was the number one predictor we saw of a resilient team, a team that really solved problems, saw around corners, didn't get so exhausted that they crumbled. The evidence of that came, the predictive elements of that came when we saw a team that was truly co-elevating. It was about the work engagement of the team. Was the team strong? Could it talk to each other? Could the team express weakness and humility? Could the team ask for help? And if that was true, you found resilience. Where it wasn't true, you lost and you found yourselves washed up on the beach. Now, I want to just show you this model again. Right? So this model again talks about how you can go forward and re-engineer your monthly foresight process and make it a team sport. How you can begin to practice agility and truly bring Agile at the executive team level with empowered teams, peer-to-peer feedback. You can be much more inclusive, more collaborative, more co-elevating, more innovative as a result of the tools that we have today. And you can build resilience. You can build resilience if you really make it a team sport and the team's responsibility for lifting each other up. Now that's a methodology. Each of these is a methodology that we're coming out with a book on that it's actually shipping to the publisher at the end of this month. And I think, John, I don't know if we had talked to Rick about this, but we had promised we would be willing to release a summary of the book, because it won't actually hit the press until the end of the year, the beginning of next, based on the world's most horrific industry called publishing. But it's done. And so we can actually give you all a summary if you're interested. And John, I think people are just going to coelevation.com. And if you go to coelevation.com in the next day or 24 hours, John will make note and somebody will send you the summary.
Yeah, for sure we will.
Great. I would just, yeah, that'd be great. Now, let me also spend a little bit of time, and hopefully I'm not boring you too much by just me droning on so much. I mean, if there's questions, I would love for you to jump in, but I want to talk a little bit about workforce redesign and business model redesign. Let me start with business model redesign. We identified a series of people who we called faculty members. These are practitioners like yourselves who really wanted to step up to the forefront and do deeper research with us. And Maria from Anthem was just amazing. And she helped us put this model together with a whole series of discussions with your peers. And we're looking at the following. I mean, everybody was looking down at the workplace decision dials and looking at whether you're going to be in person or remote. But very few people looked at all of these dials. And there's a few I want to really pressure you on. One of them is offshore versus onshore. You know, we had a while ago an opportunity in most of our IT organizations to look at our outsourcing our IT organizations to India and other places. And many organizations did that. And then there was a rubber band effect and they went back to going in insourcing. But I remember all of those conversations when I was back at Deloitte. But today, why would you hire somebody in a large city local market to be an administrative assistant that's going to cost you, $80,000 to $100,000, and or a sales support person at that same price point, when there's a very smart, college educated, incredibly well versed, English speaking, driven individual who works in the Philippines, who works in Colombia, who works in Costa Rica, or works in Mexico. Now, I happen to say that because I now have associates in my organization that work in the Philippines, that work in Costa Rica, that work in Colombia, that work in Mexico. And what I've been able to do is, it's actually interesting. I didn't have to replace anybody. I was able to grow my organization with support that I could have never had in the past. So it used to be, think about this, and this is one of the parts of this chapter I called Lego block workforce. Think of a job like a salesperson. So our salespeople had a chunk of their job that was research, chunk of their job that was outbound solicitation, chunk of their job that was scheduling, right? Chunk of their job that was relationship and actual selling. Well, what do I want to pay? What do I want to pay an 80K base, 150 to 200K salesperson? What do I want to pay them to do? Do I want to pay them for scheduling? Do I want to pay them for research? What if I could get a person who used to be paid $25,000 in Colombia or in Costa Rica, and I could pay them $30,000 to $40,000? And those individuals could be my research, my scheduling, my et cetera. What if I could hire an incredibly smart director of marketing for a third the price in the Philippines, who is perfectly happy and in fact thrilled to work the night shift so that she's working on our hours between 11 o'clock and 6 in the morning. And she's extraordinary, by the way. So one of the things that I want you to think about is opening your organization to be truly global. Now, I know that that's bold and daring to some of you, and you might start asking the question, well, how do I find this person? What agencies do I use, et cetera? All doable, but you've got to be curious and you've got to be interested. Now, I have to say that the other thing that I've started looking at, and this bridges between the Lego block workforce and the next piece, which is true business model redesign. I think we need to start looking at at augmentation of our workforce using technology. My friend Peter Diamandis says, and I'm gonna quote him roughly. He basically says, if you're not an AI business in 5 years, you're not in business. Now, I don't know how aggressive that is, but the bottom line is, if we're not using, just think about me. What do? I coach teams. I coach executive teams. John and I and the rest of our partners, we go in and we help organizations transform their companies by coaching executive teams. And we're usually there for about 6 months. Give you a couple of ideas. What if we had a technology tool that could give the leader a constant dashboard of the sentiment of their associates and could actually intervene as a result of that? I'm not talking about an annual employee engagement survey. I'm talking about a constant heat map of your team. What if in a meeting, at the end of the meeting, this is something I'm actually talking to a few organizations about, all these things are, what if in a meeting I could actually see at the end of the meeting what percentage Keith Ferrazzi spoke, Rick spoke, etc. And then what if over time I could correlate that with gender, race? What if I could actually show you preconceived micro biases in your organization or leaders that didn't open up for questions? What if at the end of that, it would prompt the leader to, once they saw that, whether or not that was the right balance they had intended for the meeting itself? I mean, this is just me asking the question in my segment: how does AI and technology transform the future of what I'm doing, which is transforming teams to transform the world? That's our mission. And how do I use AI to do that? And how do I get there? By teaming out, by having this monthly transformation meeting, by inviting in one of the smartest people that I know in AI and machine learning, who recently just exited his company for several $100 million personally, and he's an old fraternity brother of mine. But now he's an augmented part of my team that I don't have to pay a base rate. I don't have to pay a base compensation to. He's a smart entrepreneur looking to build AI on the back of my platform. Right? So start thinking about your company as a platform. If you've got an existing business with an existing customer base, you're a platform. How do you reinvent businesses? But don't try to build it yourself. I work with too many companies. Right now, I'm coaching some companies in the mental well-being space, and they're creating molecules. They're a biotech company creating molecules for PTSD, psychology, et cetera. But at the same time, they're building retail clinics, and at the same time, they're building a technology platform. Good luck. Good luck. Given the resources that you have, given the expertise that you have, can you really be exceptional at all three of those things? Maybe, but it's, organizations build on the back of strength. And if you're a relative startup and you're trying to do all three things equally as well, it's very difficult. So why would I try to build it? Well, I'm not. I've got Darren building it. I'm not trying to build it while I'm also trying to scale basic coaching competencies. So I want you to really think about now, who pressures you to think differently and think this way? Your transformation team. Look, I want to pause for a second. One of the things I want to do for you is we've identified this past year a set of competencies that every team needs to have. And I want to give you a quick survey that I think would be fun to engage in. First thing I want to do is I want you to add any questions you have right now. While you're answering the survey, which just is launched, I'm going to walk through it with you, so don't worry about it. But what I want you to do is I want you to think about questions you have for me so that John and the team can start teeing them up for me while we're doing the survey. So I'm just going to give you a couple of seconds to start the question. I want every person to ask me a question, please. I'm going to pause until I see at least a handful coming up. All right. All right. There's a lot of people here, but I'm not seeing a lot of stuff in the chat. So
Keith, you're seeing some questions come in on Q&A in addition.
Oh,
to
I am?
chat. Yep.
think that means I should go look at Q&A. Okay, got it. All right, good. So let me do this now. Let me go into the chat room, and you'll see John had launched a survey.
Yeah, actually, Ian launched it.
Oh, Ian launched a survey. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and start this here. All right, name, Keith, Ferrazzi, FG, Keith at FGLT.com. Okay. All right, here we go. So I'm going to go through these eight questions with you. And I highly recommend you answer these. Now, Rick, everybody here is most likely a CEO, right? CEO, a leader of a company.
Yes.
Okay. So answer this as to what you think your executive team is. And I'll be honest, I'm going to go through and answer my own team because we've got a brand new team at Ferrazzi Greenlight. We've probably, grown our team by over a third this past year, turned over a few individuals as well. So maybe 50% new members of that executive team. So what I want to do is I'm going to go through here and I'm going to answer it for my team. Our team has no conflict avoidance. We challenge in the room and speak candidly in service of the team's mission, even when it's risky to do so. So I'm going to pause here for a second, describe why I'm not going to put strongly agree. I don't think my team is fully exposing to each other what they would say to me behind the scenes. I'm still getting 100% of candor directly, but I'm still seeing people coming to me with that 100% of candor, but not talking to each other directly. And that's got to change. Now, but we do have a very strong culture of candor. So I'm going to go with agree because I am trying to do it. And I always am very candid. All right, collaboration. Our team does not have silos. We collaborate and create tangible value from the interdependencies that exist between members. Now, I'm going to fault myself on this one a little bit because the reality is I allowed distinct divisions to start my business. So I've got, this practice and this practice and this practice, and I'm trying to bring them together to have both divisional presidents, but also an interdependency among them. And I think we're doing a reasonable job, but we could definitely go much further. So I'm going to say, I don't know. John, would you go agree or disagree?
I'd probably go neutral on that one.
Neutral. Okay. Okay. Teaming out. Now, this is really important, what I was sharing earlier. Our team is not encumbered by hierarchy or control. All members of our team strategically and proactively build authentic and deep relationships with those who are critical to our success and the success of our team. So, listen, it's not hub and spoke to you. There's no hierarchy. People get stuff done. And I think in general, there's a big entrepreneurial boost in my company, but I think because we were much smaller earlier, I'm still the hub and spoke. So I would say on this one, I would also say neither agree or disagree. We're changing that, and I'm really excited about more interdependency extraction. But I still think that that's somewhere in the middle. Accountability. Our team members have strong accountability and meet their goals and commitments. And we're dedicated to holding each other accountable, doing whatever it takes to cross the finish line together. Old school accountability is your team gets the job done. They make their numbers. They hit it out of the ballpark. They don't miss, right? That's old school accountability. And that's a part of this. But it's only half. The other half is they hold each other accountable. They kick each other's butts. They give each other feedback, right? We're going to deal with the development piece by itself, but does your team hold each other accountable? Right? That's powerful. That's powerful. So where do you go on that? I'd say agree. That's newly forming. Development. Our team is humble and hungry to learn. Are you have seekers in your company? Is your team insecure and doesn't like criticism? Or are they open and humble to just want to change? Do they want to hear other people's perspective when they feel that they may be needing an opportunity for improvement? Or is everybody defensive and protecting themselves against each other. I think I'm getting there with my team, but I've got some pockets where humility and I'm seeking where I want to improve needs to occur. Maybe I put agree. Okay, a couple last ones. Energy. Our team, this is what I'm talking about. The team owns resilience. Our team is maintaining engagement and responsible for elevating each other's energy. Does your team lift each other up, or is that your job? Does your team lift each other up? Are you worried about each other and their success? And, it's like I was thinking the other day, I've got one team member of ours in the operations side of the business who had a real health problem and had to take a 1-month sabbatical. And I was asking myself, are all of our team members leaning in and worried about how he's doing? Are team members calling and making sure we're checking in? Do we own each other's energy, emotional and physical? Or are we taking care of ourselves and nicking at each other? And that's the worst case scenario on the other spectrum. Are we owning each other's, lifting each other's energy up? And then, two more. I thought one. Relationships. This is a good one. Are our team deeply committed? Is our team deeply committed to one another? Did they lead with generosity, building caring, trusting, supportive relationships with one another? Are they caring? Are they really focused on building those personal relationships? Outcomes. Our team is achieving its full potential as a team as it pursues breakthrough innovation and transformation. Is your team truly in pursuit of breakthrough innovation and transformation, or more business as usual? Okay, done. All right. Well, I'm hopeful that filling in that survey evoked some interesting questions as well as the stuff that I talked about before.
Hey, Keith, just a note for everyone. We'll go ahead and share the results, so everyone will have an opportunity to see how we as a team scored ourselves collectively.
Oh, that's great. Love it. And you can get that survey. It's a free survey. You can get it at coelevation.com. And you can even ask your team to fill it out if you want. So let's go to some questions.
Hey, Keith, I'm going to tee one up for you because it's one that we actually get a lot, which is, if we continue working remotely, the concern is how to maintain team connectedness so newer members don't leave just for larger compensation.
Yeah, I love it. Let me actually, I love questions like that. I love because, there's good questions and then there's great questions when you have a slide for them. Let me find that slide. What broke down this past year was not physical distance. Everybody pointed at physical distance as the reason for teams struggling, not connecting. But what broke down was when you didn't purposefully, as a leader, work on building affinity, closing that distance of relationship. I would highly recommend that you curate, as a part of your transformation meetings, at least once every other month, a long, slow dinner on Zoom. And it's perfectly fine when you get together and you ask the question, what are you struggling with personally and professionally? And people get a chance to share authentically what's going on. I have a 27-year-old son who is in rehab right now. Just went in a month ago. I'm very proud of his sobriety of a month. And I went to the rehab clinic this weekend and I sat in the meeting with him. And, but I'm also struggling with a very long time. I got him at 16. He was a foster son. And I'm struggling with my perceptions and disappointment for 10 years with this young boy's choices and now man's choices. And I'd like to just push reboot in my head, but I feel my emotional challenge that way. And that's my issue. And it's something I'm struggling with. When you share authentically as a team, what's really going on in your lives, empathy is created, relationships are stronger, trust is bonded. But we've got to be able to have the courage to curate the time to do it. So I highly recommend highly curated commitment sessions with your team that are really important to the business that you used to get, serendipitously at the bar, at the sales meeting, or, after the sales meeting, or on the walk-in from the car park where you're chatting about your kids, or in the coffee room, or at the lunch room, or the walk around the building, whatever it is. And we've got to make that difference. Thank you for that question.
And Keith, Carrie Ann posted something she saw today from Jamie Dimon, CEO of JP Morgan. In a recent interview, he said that he's done with Zoom and remote work. A remote doesn't work for idea generation, young people looking to hustle, and especially culture. What are your thoughts on that? And I think the culture part of that is related to the previous question, that we've heard from CEOs that they're concerned about the culture of their company if it's 100% remote.
I love Jamie, and I know Jamie, and I could just choke and swear. And I'm coming out with this white paper, which is, that's the other thing, John. If I know that it's not at coelevation.com yet, but what I would invite all of you who are watching this, I would invite you to audit my paper. I'm writing a white paper for Harvard Business Review that won't be out for a couple of months, but it really is our research about how do you build authentic, deep, innovative teams in a remote and hybrid world. And one of the things, I just told you about this idea of, anyway, there is a clear formula that very few companies followed. Jamie is making a decision based on the assumption that how they did work was the best they could do. And it's not. And there's an entire way of meeting that isn't even been scratched the surface of, and it's called asynchronous collaboration. We're also inundated in meetings. What about the shared Google Docs? What about the decision boards? What about, we can reduce the number of meetings you have by 30% if you use asynchronous meetings, not just every time you have I'll give you, for instance, let's say you want to launch a new project. Instead of just calling the first meeting, having a discussion which kind of figures out who wasn't there that should be there, what are the problems we have that need to be solved. What if you have a decision board in advance? What are all the problems that you think, as the leader of this project, what are all the problems you think need to be solved? Who are all the people in the next column? Who are all the people for each of those problems that need to be involved? Either because they're more innovative, like my friend Darren on AI, or they're change management oriented, like John, who's a business leader of my team that has to be there, right? And then what are the crazy ass ideas you're thinking about that you want to add that are unbounded in your thinking? And then what are the nuttiest issues you think you're gonna bump up against that will make it difficult, right? Put those in a spreadsheet, send them out to everybody that would come to the meeting. Let them add the questions, let them add the people, let them challenge the crazy idea, let them add crazy ideas, let them add additional nutty issues. Now you're sitting on a robust set of data that you can decide what 3 meetings have to happen. Now, if you had done that in a normal way, when you started meetings, you'd be into your 3rd meeting until you figured out most of that information. So there are simple ways that we can work more effectively in a virtual world that we're just not using. Let me show you this data that came from the pandemic. So the baseline of teams pre-pandemic. So these questions you just answered, how collaborative is your team? Scale of 0 to 5, the average team is at a 2.5. If you insert the high return practices we've been talking about on this call, in a virtual world, you can get it to 4.3. How much candor is there in your team? 2.4 on the scale of 0 to 5. If you use breakout rooms where there's more psychological safety, open up asynchronous collaboration where people can think and add their comments candidly into a document, you get up to a 4.4. So these shifts have been validated over this past year. And it's so important for us to begin to think differently about the way we work. I'm noticing we've got about is that you will leap forward 5 years, that you will redefine your future based on this inflection point. And then even if you haven't yet, that transformation meeting that you could start hosting on a monthly basis would be transformative in looking around those corners, finding opportunities, avoiding risks, right? Leading in an agile way, lifting each other's, and really back to the book that I wrote, co-elevating. I want you to co-elevate your team into the future.